The first thing people noticed about the photograph was not the storm, or the darkening sky, or even the stretch of empty beach that seemed to go on forever. It was the man near the waterline, stood so still that at first glance he looked like a trick of shadow, a smear where the light failed to settle properly. By the time anyone noticed him, 3 people were already dead, and Daniel Hargreaves understood something he had never been taught growing up. Death does not arrive suddenly. It waits. It watches. Sometimes it sends someone ahead of it, someone to measure your patience and test your fear. Daniel had come to the coast because silence had begun to scare him less than memories. The city still smelled like Emma coffee, perfume, damp wool. In winter, and the quiet coastal town of Greywick offered something different. Here the air tasted of salt and rust, and the wind had a way of scouring thoughts down to their bones. He rented a narrow seaside cottage with paint peeling like old scabs, and a window that looked straight onto the beach. The landlord warned him about storms and loneliness. Daniel smiled and said he was used to both. On his first evening, he walked along the shore as the sun bled out behind the clouds. The tide was low, leaving the sand dark and shining like wet skin. Gulls wheeled overhead, screaming, a chorus of warning that Daniel ignored. That was when he saw the man for the first time. He was standing close to the water, hands in his coat pockets, unmoving. There was nothing strange about him at first glance. He wasn't transparent. He wasn't twisted or monstrous. He was just there, and that somehow made it worse. Daniel stopped walking without realizing he had done so. The longer he stared, the more a sense of wrongness crept in, slow and deliberate, like fingers testing a bruise. Daniel raised his camera out of habit and took a photograph. The shutter clicked loud in the open air. The man didn't turn. When Daniel lowered the camera and looked again, the shoreline was empty. No footprints, no coat. Just the sea continuing its endless, patient breathing. Daniel laughed, but the sound fell flat and didn't come back to him. That night, he dreamed of standing on the same beach while someone called his name from the water. He could hear panic in the voice, desperation, the raw animal terror of drowning, but his feet wouldn't move. He woke with his heart hammering and the taste of salt in his mouth. The next morning, sirens tore through the town before the fog had fully lifted. A fisherman had been found dead near the old groin. Heart failure, he said. Sudden, Daniel stood at his window and watched the emergency lights smear red across the mist. Something in his chest tightened. Not grief, not fear, but recognition. He wanted to leave. He wanted to drive back to the city and pretend he had never seen the man. But some part of him, the part that had been listening to silence for months, knew he wouldn't. Over the following days, Daniel saw the man again and again. Always during storms, always near the water. Sometimes far away, sometimes close enough that Daniel felt he could reach out and touch him. And each time, someone died. A woman slipped in her bath. A teenager was pulled under by a rip current. An old man collapsed in the street outside the bakery. The town whispered about bad luck and cursed tides. Daniel stopped sleeping. He checked his photographs obsessively. In every image taken when the man was present, there was something wrong. A shadow bending against the sun. A blank space where details should have been. The man himself never appeared in the pictures, no matter how clearly Daniel remembered seeing him through the lens. It was as if the camera refused to acknowledge his existence. Daniel began keeping a journal, a desperate attempt to make sense of what he was seeing. He noted the times, the weather, the position of the sun, the angle of the waves, even the cries of gulls. Patterns emerged. The man appeared always when someone was about to die. Always when the tide brought secrets from the deep, things that should have remained buried. Daniel's hand shook when he wrote about it, ink bleeding into rain-spattered pages like blood on snow. His dreams became worse, more vivid, more precise. Each dream showed the face of the next victim, and each dream left him with a taste of metal in his mouth, the scent of wet linen, the feel of the sea clawing at his ankles. And the boy went missing. Daniel felt it before he heard it. The air thickened, the sky bruised purple. He saw the man standing closer to the surf than ever before, head bowed, waiting. Search parties combed the beach that night, shouting the boy's name until their voices cracked. Daniel joined them, though his legs felt weak, didn't call out. He already knew. The boy's body washed ashore the next morning. Daniel broke then, though quietly, in the way buildings collapse inward before anyone notices. He went to the oldest pub in town and asked the bartender, a woman with eyes worn smooth by years of watching people, if she had ever heard of a man who waited on the beach. She didn't ask him to explain. She just went still. "My grandmother called him the Watcher," she said. "She said if you see him, it's already too late for someone." "What does he want?" Daniel asked. The woman shook her head. "He doesn't want. He waits." That night, the storm came harder than any before it. Wind battered the cottage. Rain lashed the windows like thrown gravel. Daniel stood frozen in his living room when he saw the figure outside, no longer near the water, but directly in front of his house. The man looked up. The first time Daniel saw his face, it was his own, aged and hollowed, eyes carrying a weight of patience that made Daniel's stomach drop.
Understanding.
Settled over him with sickening clarity. The Watcher wasn't death. He wasn't a messenger. He was the echo left behind by choices not made, by moments where action should have replaced waiting. Daniel ran outside, screaming questions he already knew the answers to. The man watched him with something like pity. "I didn't kill them," Daniel shouted. "No," the man said, voice heavy with years Daniel hadn't lived yet. "You just learned how to wait." Memories surged up, standing in the doorway during that final argument. Rain streaking down the glass behind her, waiting for him to say something, anything, to stop her from leaving. He had stood there. He had waited. The choice had been made in stillness. The storm swallowed Daniel whole. He ran down the beach blindly, the sand slick beneath his feet. Waves slapped his ankles, cold and vicious. Lightning tore the sky in jagged lines. Every step felt heavier, as if the tide was pulling him backward, dragging him toward inevitability. He looked over his shoulder. No one followed. But the sensation of being watched pressed into him, relentless, invisible. His lungs burned with every gulp of rain-filled air. The Watcher was silent, but every instinct screamed that he was there, always there, just beyond sight. Daniel remembered the boy, the fisherman, the woman, the old man. Each death tied to his inaction. Each death waiting for his understanding. Panic morphed into terror, and terror morphed into something darker. Recognition. He understood what he was meant to do, and it was unbearable. To flee was useless. To act had already failed. Every choice, every hesitation, every moment of waiting had been catalogued, measured, and deemed worthy of punishment. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had fractured in the storm. Daniel stopped running. He collapsed onto the wet sand, chest heaving, rain pouring into his eyes. The sea roared, claiming the edges of the beach, reclaiming footprints. He could see the man now, looming in the distance, unmoving, umbrella open against the wind. And then, slowly, as Daniel's mind uncoiled into clarity and madness, he realized the man was him. Not a reflection, not a twin, but the shape he was always meant to become. The next morning, when townspeople came to the beach, they found Daniel standing at the waterline, coat dark and dripping, umbrella black and open, gaze fixed on the horizon. They asked him questions, but he did not answer. He never moved. Footprints behind him led only to the edge of the surf. And then, weeks later, another photograph surfaced on social media. An empty beach, a storm-dark sky, and a figure standing near the waterline. By the time anyone noticed, someone in Greywick was already gone. Some say the Watcher waits for those about to die. Others say he is a warning. But Daniel Hargreaves knew the truth. The Watcher does not wait for death. He waits for patience. He waits for hesitation. He waits for the human heart to decide that inaction is easier than action. And then he becomes the shape of inevitability, the thing you see when it is too late. The shadow standing at the water's edge while the sea laughs quietly, eternally, and patiently. The beach remains empty to casual eyes. Salt and wind, gulls and sand. But when storms gather, when the tide pulls secrets from the depths, the Watcher stands again, tall, silent, patient, waiting for the next soul who thinks waiting is harmless. Waiting to teach them, finally, that some choices cannot be undone, some moments cannot be escaped. And some deaths are not accidents. They are rehearsals for the one who learns too late to move. The first time Arthur Bell saw the man with the black umbrella, the beach was empty. The sky was screaming with wind, and the sea smelled like rusted iron. Waves clawed at the shoreline like they wanted something back.
device. Something that had been stolen from them long ago.
The man stood where wet sand met dry, close enough for Arthur to see the umbrella judder and strain against the storm, but not close enough to see the man's face beneath it. He didn't move. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't turn his head. And somehow, without eyes. Without motion, Arthur knew with a certainty that settled into his bones like cold arthritis that the man was watching him. Arthur stopped walking. His boots sank slightly into the sand, and the sound felt indecently loud. He waited for the figure to wave, or step forward, or do something normal that would explain his presence on a beach that sane people avoided in February. Nothing happened. The umbrella stayed open, impossibly steady, its black fabric swallowing rain like it was thirsty for it. The storm roared on, but around the man there seemed to be a pocket of stillness, like the air itself was holding its breath. Arthur told himself it was just another coastal eccentric, some fool enjoying the drama of bad weather. He told himself that, and still his stomach knotted, and his mouth tasted faintly of pennies. Arthur turned away first. He hated himself for it, but he did. When he looked back over his shoulder, the man was gone. No footprints, no umbrella, just the sea, pretending it had always been alone. That night, Arthur dreamed of drowning again. He always dreamed of it, but this time was different. This time Margaret wasn't reaching for him. This time he was standing on the shore, dry and warm, watching someone else go under while rain drummed on black fabric above his head. He woke up choking on a scream that scraped his throat raw. The second time he saw the man was 3 days later, and by then the idea had already taken root in his mind, like mold in a damp cupboard. The weather was worse, the kind of storm that rattled windows inland and made radios hiss with static. Arthur was halfway through his walk when he spotted the umbrella again, farther down the beach this time, closer to the old jetty where children weren't supposed to play. The man stood angled slightly toward the sea, as though listening to something beneath the waves. Arthur felt the now familiar squeeze in his chest, tighter this time, sharper. He didn't approach. He stood and watched, counting his breaths, telling himself that grief did strange things to the eyes and mind. When a wave surged higher than the others and broke near the figure's feet, Arthur flinched. The man didn't, not even when water lapped at his shoes. Then the rain eased, just a little, and when Arthur blinked, the man was gone again, leaving behind nothing but smooth sand and the hiss of retreating water. Arthur stopped telling people about Margaret years ago. Sympathy had an expiration date, and he'd learned to recognize the look people gave him when his loss overstayed its welcome. Still that evening at the pub with rain hammering the windows and his pint sweating under his hand, he mentioned the umbrella man to Tom Wilkes, who'd fished these waters for 40 years and had the face to prove it. Tom didn't laugh. That was the first bad sign. Instead, he went quiet, staring into his beer like it might confess something. "You don't see him unless he's got a reason," Tom said finally, voice low. "My father saw him. So did my uncle. Both before." "Accidents." "What kind of accidents?" Arthur asked, though part of him already knew. Tom swallowed. "The kind you don't walk away from." Arthur went home early that night, the taste of ale sour in his mouth. He dreamed of a child crying beneath crashing waves, sound muffled, distorted, like it was coming through water and years at the same time. After that, Arthur began to notice things about himself that he didn't like. Little cracks, little slips. The way his patience wore thinner when the neighborhood children screamed outside his window. The way anger flared too quickly, too brightly, like dry tinder catching a spark. He told himself it was normal. Grief changed people. Loneliness sharpened edges. Still, when he found himself gripping the edge of his kitchen counter one afternoon, knuckles white, jaw clenched, because a football had bounced into his garden again, he felt something cold uncoiled in his gut. The third sighting came with confirmation. A boy named Lewis Carter drowned near the jetty, slipped on algae like wood, hit his head, went under before anyone could reach him. Arthur stood among the onlookers as the body was pulled from the water, pale and terribly still. He felt sick not just because of the sight, but because he knew that the umbrella man had been standing there the day before, silent and waiting. That night, Arthur stood at his bedroom window and watched the storm roll in. He didn't want to see the man again, but some dark, traitorous part of him needed to know. When the rain finally came, lashing the beach into a blur of gray, he saw the black dot appear near the waterline, closer to his house now, closer than ever before. Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. The man stood there for a long time, umbrella tilted just enough that Arthur could almost imagine a face beneath it. Almost. The rain poured, the sea roared, and still the man did not move. Arthur pressed his forehead to the glass and whispered, "What do you want?" The wind answered for him, rattling the window like laughter. Sleep abandoned him after that. Memories clawed their way up from places he'd buried them.
Oh.
Margaret's last argument, her accusing eyes. The way his hands had curled into fists when she said she was taking their daughter to her sister S for the weekend. Their daughter. The word still hurt, even though Emily had been gone longer than Margaret. Cancer. Quiet. Unfair. Sometimes Arthur wondered if the universe hadn't been balancing books all along. The beach grew busier as summer crept in. Tourists arrived. Children laughed. Arthur walked later in the day now, avoiding mornings, avoiding storms. But storms have a way of finding you, no matter where you hide. One afternoon, dark clouds rolled in fast and ugly, and Arthur found himself hurrying along the shoreline, heart racing for reasons he couldn't name. Then he heard a child screaming, sharp and panicked. He followed the sound toward the jetty. A little girl stood near the edge, crying, her foot caught between two warped planks. Waves slapped at the wood beneath her. No adults in sight. Arthur rushed forward, rain already starting to fall, his boots slipping. As he reached her, the storm broke fully, rain hammering down, wind howling. He bent to free her foot, hands shaking, and that was when he saw it out of the corner of his eye. The umbrella. Black. Perfect. Standing a few yards away on the sand, something inside Arthur snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet final break like a bone giving way under pressure. For one terrible moment he saw not the girl, but Margaret's face twisted with accusation. Heard her voice, felt the weight of years of grief and guilt crash down on him all at once. The sea surged. The girl screamed again. Arthur's hands tightened. It was over quickly. Later, people would say it was an accident. Slippery wood. Sudden wave, panic. Arthur let go. He stepped back. He watched the water take her. When the screaming stopped, the rain eased, just a little. Arthur stood there, shaking, staring at the place where she'd disappeared. Slowly, numbly, he turned toward where the umbrella man had been. The beach was empty. They never found the girl's body. Arthur attended the vigil, stood among the candles and flowers, accepted condolences with hollow eyes. At night, he dreamed of standing beneath a black umbrella, rain whispering secrets against the fabric. He dreamed of stillness. The first time he realized something was wrong was when he went for his walk during a storm, and no one looked at him. Not really. People passed by, umbrellas up, eyes sliding over him like he wasn't there. He stopped a woman and asked the time. She flinched, pulled her coat tighter, hurried away without answering. Arthur's reflection in shop windows seemed off, darker, blurred around the edges. He reached the beach and stopped. A man stood near the waterline, holding a black umbrella. The man didn't move. Arthur understood then, fully, completely. The knowledge settled over him like the weight of wet cloth. The umbrella man wasn't a warning, he was a consequence, a marker. A shaped grief wore when it finally hollowed you out and left something else behind. Arthur tried to scream, no sound came out. The storm raged on, uncaring. Waves hissed and withdrew. And Arthur Bell stood on the beach, holding a black umbrella, watching the shoreline with patient, eternal stillness, waiting for the next soul close enough to the edge to fall.